Good evening, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to Talking Point. My name is Faraz Patel. We'd like to thank you, the viewer, for staying with us here on Hilaal TV, DSTV channel 347. Later on, of course, you will be hearing from President Cyril Ramaphosa in his press conference, which he delivered during the presidency oversight visit in the Eastern Cape. Now, South Africans have just under 2 weeks to go until the value-added tax of 0.5% will increase. At this very moment, negotiations are taking place with two of the major government of national unity partners, the ANC and the DA, as to find out whether this could be scrapped. Of course, compromises are going to be made at this very moment, but South Africans and the 50 million South Africans would be hoping that somehow this VAT doesn't increase in an already struggling economy right now. But Build One South Africa has said that they have a way to make sure that the value-added tax is not added. Of course, it was BOSA who voted in favor of the VAT, but its leaders said only on the condition that other sources of revenue can be achieved. Joining me now, I'd like to welcome Build One South Africa's spokesperson, Roger Solomons. Roger, good day. Thank you so much for joining us here on Talking Point on Hilaal TV.
Good afternoon to you, and good afternoon to all the viewers and listeners.
Roger, I want to touch on this plan that Build One South Africa has. If I stand to be corrected, they voted in favor of the VAT, but only on certain prerequisites. Talk to us about that. What is the actual plan that BOSA has in order to make sure that there is a source of income which does not hit the pockets of the ordinary citizens of this country?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity. I want to correct that we supported the fiscal framework,
Okay.
not the VAT. So VAT is but only a component of the bigger budget and the fiscal framework, which was passed. The fiscal framework is also just step one of a three-step process to ultimately adopt the budget, which will only be late in this year in June. So we've, as Bold One SA BOSA, through our leader, Mr. Mamane, have put it on record that we support the fiscal framework because it's a necessary step, but we will not support the proposed VAT, and we will withdraw our support as BOSA if the proposed VAT is implemented. So that was about 2 weeks ago. During this past 10, 14 days, there's been ongoing negotiations with the ANC and all other parties. And we want to appreciate that the ANC has had a matured relationship and has been open to BOSA and other parties to come up with proposals and submissions on how we can reverse or prevent the proposed VAT. So I'm putting it on the record, BOSA does not support the VAT. We did not vote for the VAT. We voted to support the fiscal framework so that we can now contribute as what we're doing now with a submission and proposals on how we can reverse that.
Now, thank you for that correction, Roger. So, Roger, within the fiscal framework, of course, it encompasses a whole lot of things that would come with it. Apologies for that. One of them, of course, is the reviewing of cabinet budgets. So, I mean, that's going to be quite a touchy subject if you're a cabinet minister. For long now, and I know your leader, Musi Maimane, has said that, look, there has to be a proper review of this because as we stand at this very moment, it does seem quite bloated. Within those negotiations with the ANC, when that was brought up, if that's something BOSA could share, is that something that ANC cabinet ministers, and of course you can't speak for the others because there are other parties that make up this GNU, but is that something that they're willing to listen to, given that there can be other sources of revenue which could contribute to the fiscus of the country?
Absolutely. What we have as a country, we don't have a tax problem. We've got a governance problem. We have a GNU government that is not in synergy, and there's no actual plan and unity to grow the economy. So that's the problem. So we as BOSA have put our proposals and submission on the table. One of them, you're right, is to trim down cabinet. It's to trim down cabinet. One of our proposals as well as a new revenue which is to the tune of 65 billion rands, is to have a sin tax on online gambling, a 6% sin tax on online gambling. But to your point, if we reduce the cabinet, if we reduce deputy ministers, it saves us billions and billions of rands. If we take away the VIP protection for politicians, it immediately frees up to 2 to 3 billion rands. So there is other proposals, and it requires the political and institutional will to ensure that we have new revenue that comes in, but there's also savings that can take place. But more importantly, what step 2 and step 3 is all about in this process, it's looking at the expenditure, because at the moment we're spending way more than our income. So again, the ANC has been open. There's been ongoing negotiations, about 3 to 4 different meetings already, very progressive, very matured, where we've put these proposals on the table. They're short to medium term quick wins for government. So the ball ultimately is in the ANC's court now, together with its GNU partners.
Yeah, and I'm going to touch on, of course, potential BOSA GNU in a bit after the break. Roger, I think it's quite clear to state that when we look at the current economy, it's dire. Signs looked a little bit positive just after, of course, the GNU was established. A lot of it coming down to investor confidence. When I spoke to a Business Unity South Africa last week, what they were saying was that there has to be a clear communication between especially the two major parties, the DA and the ANC, which could allow for an increase in investor confidence. At this very moment, the talk is to try and get 1% growth of GDP, at least by the third quarter of this year. I think both you and I can agree, Roger, it's going to be very difficult for that to happen, given, of course, the potential tariffs. Of course, I know it's been paused now for just under 90 days, but also the fact that with this limbo of the ANC and the DA, nobody really knows what's going to happen, which means investor confidence is stagnant at this very moment. That 1% growth, I think we really need to put a pause on that, don't we, Roger, given that this country right now first needs political correction, then of course you can go ahead and say, let's try and create some economic correction for this country to find some sort of growth.
Absolutely. I do want to remain optimistic, and as BOSA, we've always remained that. And as BOSA, we've even suggested and put it on record to our leader, Musi Maimane, that the 3% growth target that has been set or pronounced by the president is not enough to grow the economy and to create jobs. We at least need to grow by 5%. So we need to set that target at 5% if we really want to see any type of growth. But you're quite right. The political environment and the political stability cannot operate in isolation to the economy. So it does make sense. And what we are saying is that, again, we don't have a tax problem in South Africa. We've got a governance issue, and that synergy in the GNU is not there. That actual plan of implementation has never been there since the inception of the GNU. So this fallout now is just but a consequence of that absence of a real plan to grow the economy and ultimately ensure that there is a job in every home, as BOSA has always been advocating for.
Yeah, and I mean, I want to touch before we go to the break on this unemployment crisis. I mean, we're sitting close to that 40% mark, and of course we will be awaiting further stats, of course, for the first quarter, which will only probably come out towards either the end of this month or at the start of May. And I think that's where I think every South African wants to focus on, the fact that the creation of jobs right now is of utmost importance. And if we're not getting a job per home, then we really are falling behind in terms of creating that growth of 1%, which we want to achieve.
No, absolutely, absolutely. It should be every South African's business to ensure that they are somehow contributing to growing the economy and ultimately creating jobs, be it in the political space or the private sector. And I think what is needed now is that leadership and that political will to make the hard calls. And we need to ensure, especially the township economy, which is very close to to the heart of Bold One SA. If the township economy is growing and the township economy is booming, we fundamentally believe that we will see better growth in the economy in terms of job creation.
After the break, I continue my conversation with Roger Solomons. We're going to be touching on the government of national unity from a political perspective. What would tempt Build One South Africa to join the GNU? What are their terms and conditions with regards to that? Do stay tuned. We'll be back after this break. Welcome back to Talking Point. I'm starting conversation with the national spokesperson of Build One South Africa, Roger Solomons. Roger, again, thank you so much for staying with us. Okay, Roger, I think part of the negotiations or the discussions that Build One South Africa had with the ANCs, of course, from a political perspective. I want to touch on what is it that would tempt Build One South Africa into this government of national unity. First of all, is Build One South Africa interested in being part of this coalition government?
Sure, thanks so much. Soon after the elections, when we were invited to possibly join the GNU, or when we, as BOSA, discussed it, and we've always had a position and held the position that we will not enter the GNU until the plan is shown. Because what happened was just political power mongering and position mongering, etc. In the absence of a plan for the country, and the absence of economic growth being the center stage of that plan, we felt as BOSA to remain in the opposition and to contribute constructively. So at this point in time, as I've said, we need to separate possibly forming part of the GNU and the issue of the proposed VAT. It's totally two separate issues.
Sure.
That is there. We've put it on record that we will not enter the GNU discussion. We will not support any position as such if the proposed VAT goes ahead. So we've put our submissions on the table. It's not a matter of entertaining the GNU conversation yet. We need to get over and pass the budget first. But to be honest and transparent, the GNU conversation is always on the table, and I mean it's in the prerogative of the ruling party who holds the majority in the GNU to do so, and as they've publicly communicated as well.
Yeah, I think also a lot of looking from a DA perspective, what they've, of course, as the negotiations have continued, a lot of it has been down to, of course, the expropriation bill, the NHI, but of course, the big topic, that of the value-added tax. Roger, I want to touch on expropriation because I know, BOSA has looked at it and said, look, from a land redress issue, this has to be done in a way where it doesn't hurt the economy. Now, when you look at, of course, the rhetoric that's coming from overseas, especially that from Donald Trump, he's saying this is done where it's going to leave the white compatriots of our country landless or homeless, and of course, a number of false narratives which are, of course, being peddled against South Africa. When it comes to the expropriation bill, from a Build One South Africa perspective, Roger, how important is it that when it's done in a way where South Africa's economy is not hurt, while also trying to address historical land redistribution, which was not catered for the previously disadvantaged?
Absolutely. Again, the economy, and you quite rightly said that any implementation of any bill of redress or transformation, if it is hurting the economy, then obviously it just doesn't make sense for us to pursue that. So I think the expropriation bill, so to say, is a very, very complex bill. It's a very complex process. Obviously, there's been a lot of politicking around it, but in principle, and what it is hoping to achieve morally and justly, we as Bold One SA we definitely do support it. But like you said, if it is going to damage the economy, and if we see that, then obviously we need to relook at it. But right now, we are not paying too much attention to the rhetoric and the political grandstanding of that. We are remaining constructive, remaining in our lane, and when given the opportunity, we'll definitely advocate for or against the bill itself.
I think, Roger, one of the things that I think would probably tempt BOSA into the GNU, and I think this is something that your leader and your deputy leader have said consistently, is education. Right? What we saw last year was quite a number of cuts to the basic education department, that of primary and high school sector. Quite damning, given that this is a part of the society of our country which is really needing much more money. When I spoke to your deputy leader, Nobuntu Hlazo Webster, during the State of the Nation this year, she said government really needs to rethink how the education sector gets its funding and make sure that the funding is done in not just a transparent way, but in a way which will allow teachers to go ahead and do their jobs. And she specifically mentioned that on teachers. How important is that card of education going to be for BOSA when, let's say, another round of negotiations open up with the African National Congress, even if it not already has been brought up during the first rounds of negotiations?
Absolutely. Everyone knows that close to our leader's heart is education and the reform of education. And as Baldwin say, we've always been champions advocating for reform. Education is top of the agenda and should be top of the agenda and placed center of anything that we do, because even if we want to grow our economy, we need to reform education to ensure that we are educating a generation and educating our kids to not just compete in the global economic space, but to win in the global economic space. There's no way that we can accept as a nation the 30% pass mark, for instance. It's unacceptable for us. I mean, I'm sure you've been on a flight before, and if the pilot had to welcome you on board and say he's passed his license by 30%, I'm sure you will
there'll
feel
be no
very
confidence. Definitely.
You'll be buckling up. So how dare we set up our kids to fail at 30%? So that's the first thing we will champion, is at least 50% pass mark. We got to pay our teachers better. We are saying pay the teachers equal to what doctors are earning. You know, we got to boost the morale with our teachers. We got to get them back and compensate them thoroughly. So education and reforming education, special attention at our ECD level, for instance, it's absolutely critical. So education is definitely what we champion all the time, and especially through our leader, Mani. Very passionate. We've got some real credible solutions to reform education, to change education, and to make sure we give our learners a better chance at winning in the global space and not just merely making up numbers or participating.
Roger, one final question. As we speak right now, nobody really knows what's going to happen with the GNU negotiations between the DA and the ANC, because they do hold their respective lion's share within this government of national unity, coalition government, whatever it is that it wants to be labeled as. Regardless of the outcomes, how important is it that whatever comes out from this, it comes out in a way that South Africa does not suffer from an economic level, because that's what we need. We just need an economy to grow. And whatever happens in these negotiations really is going to hinge on the discussions between two of these parties.
Absolutely. So we're really hoping that there will be maturity amongst all the role players. And as BOSA, we are in that room, we are around the table, and again, appreciate the maturity of the ANC for allowing us to contribute to the conversation. So we in the room, we are not outside making noise and politicking away. It's very important, the political stability, matured leadership, and a sober mind and a voice of reason ultimately to surface from these negotiations. To put everything aside, we've got to grow our economy. We've got to create real jobs. We've got to work towards ensuring that there's a job in every home, and ultimately breaking the back of poverty. I think South Africa, it is in uncharted territory. In the 30 years, we've never been in this. So we do have some grace for the ongoing negotiations, and also some grace of where our political leaders or parties or even the ruling party gets it wrong at times, because ultimately that is democracy. But we really hope that there can be, as in yesterday, synergy, agreement, and alignment, at least on the core values, and that is to grow the economy. And as Bold One is saying, we are right there in the forefront, fighting for that tooth and nail to make sure that the proposed VAT is reversed.
Roger, thank you so much for joining us here on Talking Point on Hilaal TV. Much appreciated.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome. That's Roger Solomon, Bold One South Africa spokesperson. Of course, as the country, we will, of course, still keep a close eye on what is happening between those negotiations from the DA and the ANC. Now, we were supposed to have Diana Bhutto, former Palestine Liberation Organization spokesperson, and also a lawyer based in Canada. Unfortunately, she had to be admitted into hospital. We wish her a speedy recovery and hope to have her soon here on Talking Point on Hilaal TV. So for the next two segments, President Cyril Ramaphosa, along with the Eastern Cape Premier Oscar Mabuyane and the Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs Minister Velenkosini Hlabisa, conducted an oversight visit in the Eastern Cape. Of course, it's a province that still suffers from so much of poverty, yet there is so much of unearthed potential that comes there, let alone some of the great struggle stalwarts that have come from that part of the province. This is the press conference that Ramaphosa did today to just highlight what it is that this presidency had done in terms of the oversight visit. That this will take you towards the end of the show. But from myself, Faraz Patel, and the rest of the team in Johannesburg, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.